Question 1. The analysis reveals that a small business in Birmingham, Alabama, has discovered a series of negative comments posted on its public Facebook page by a former disgruntled employee. These comments allege specific instances of fraudulent business practices, which, if false, could significantly damage the business's reputation and customer trust. The business owner is concerned about the potential legal ramifications under Alabama Defamation Law. What is the most prudent course of action for the business owner to take? Option A. Immediately consult with an attorney specializing in Alabama defamation law to assess the truthfulness of the statements and understand the legal requirements for proving defamation in Alabama, and to develop a strategy based on legal advice. Option B. Ignore the comments, assuming that online complaints are not legally actionable and will eventually be forgotten by the public. Option C. Post a public rebuttal on the Facebook page, detailing why the former employee's claims are false and accusing the employee of malicious intent. Option D. Promptly delete all comments from the Facebook page to prevent further damage to the business's reputation and to remove the offending content. Correct answer is A. Immediately consult with an attorney specializing in Alabama defamation law to assess the truthfulness of the statements and understand the legal requirements for proving defamation in Alabama, and to develop a strategy based on legal advice. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the rapid and often unverified dissemination of information in digital media, particularly social media platforms. Speed at which content can spread, coupled with the difficulty in controlling its reach and the potential for reputational damage, necessitates a cautious and legally informed approach. Alabama defamation law, like other jurisdictions, requires a plaintiff to prove certain elements, including a false statement of fact, publication to a third party, fault on the part of the defendant, and damages. In the context of digital media, identifying the publisher, proving fault, and quantifying damages can be complex. Careful judgment is required to balance freedom of expression with the protection of individual and corporate reputations. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation of the alleged defamatory statement's truthfulness and the context of its publication. This includes gathering evidence to determine if the statement is a verifiable fact or an opinion, assessing the intent or negligence of the poster, and evaluating any potential harm caused. Consulting with legal counsel specializing in Alabama defamation law is paramount to understand the specific nuances of the state's statutes and case law, such as the requirements for proving malice or negligence, depending on whether the plaintiff is a public or private figure. This proactive legal consultation ensures that any response or action taken is compliant with Alabama law and minimizes legal risk. An incorrect approach would be to immediately delete the content without any investigation. While this might seem like a quick fix, it fails to address the underlying legal issues. Deleting content does not erase the fact that a potentially defamatory statement was published, and it could be interpreted as an attempt to conceal evidence or avoid responsibility, which could be detrimental if legal action is pursued. Furthermore, it bypasses the crucial step of assessing the truthfulness of the statement, which is a core defense in defamation cases. Another incorrect approach is to issue a public denial or counteraccusation on the same platform without first consulting legal counsel. This can escalate the situation, potentially creating further defamatory statements or revealing sensitive information. Without a clear understanding of Alabama defamation law, such a response could inadvertently strengthen the plaintiff's case by admitting to publication or making further damaging statements. Finally, ignoring the complaint or failing to respond in a timely manner is also an unprofessional and legally risky approach. In Alabama, as elsewhere, a failure to address a potential defamation claim can lead to default judgments or a perception of guilt. It also misses the opportunity to resolve the matter amicably or to present a robust legal defense. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and risk mitigation. This involves 1. Promptly acknowledging the complaint or concern internally. 2. Immediately consulting with legal counsel experienced in Alabama defamation law. 3. Cooperating with legal counsel to conduct a thorough factual investigation. 4. Developing a response strategy based on legal advice, which may include takedown requests, factual corrections, or a formal legal defense. 5. Documenting all actions taken and communications. Question 2. Comparative studies suggest that financial advisors in Alabama face unique challenges in balancing client communication with reputational protection. Considering the elements of defamation under Alabama law, which of the following approaches best mitigates the risk of a financial advisor being held liable for making a false and defamatory statement of fact? Option A. Carefully distinguishing between statements of opinion and statements of fact, ensuring any factual statements made are truthful and can be substantiated, and framing commentary as personal belief or opinion where appropriate. Option B. Disseminating information and analysis based on industry rumors and unverified third-party reports to provide timely market insights. Option C. Making broad, negative generalizations about competitor services or investment strategies without specific evidence to highlight potential risks to clients. Option D. Presenting all market commentary and analysis as definitive factual pronouncements to convey authority and confidence to clients. The correct answer is A. Carefully distinguishing between statements of opinion and statements of fact, ensuring any factual statements made are truthful and can be substantiated, and framing commentary as personal belief or opinion where appropriate. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama defamation law, specifically the elements a plaintiff must prove. A financial advisor must balance the need to communicate with clients and potential clients about market conditions and investment opportunities with the absolute imperative to avoid making false statements of fact that could harm another's reputation. Misjudging the nature of a statement, whether it is opinion or fact, or failing to verify information before dissemination, can lead to significant legal liability under Alabama law. The advisor's professional reputation and the firm's standing are also at risk. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves carefully distinguishing between statements of opinion and statements of fact, and ensuring that any factual statements made are truthful and can be substantiated. This aligns with the core elements of defamation under Alabama law, which generally require a false and defamatory statement of fact, published to a third party, that causes harm to the plaintiff's reputation. By framing commentary as opinion or belief, and by verifying any factual assertions, the advisor mitigates the risk of making a false statement of fact. This approach prioritizes accuracy and responsible communication, adhering to the legal standards designed to protect reputations while allowing for legitimate business discourse. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to present opinions as factual assertions without qualification. This fails to recognize that, while opinions are generally protected, when presented as established truths, they can be construed as statements of fact. If these factual opinions are false and damaging, they can form the basis of a defamation claim under Alabama law. Another incorrect approach is to disseminate information without verifying its accuracy, even if the intent is to provide helpful market commentary. Alabama law does not shield individuals from liability for making false statements of fact, even if they did not intend to deceive. The failure to exercise reasonable care in verifying information before publication can lead to liability if the statement is false and defamatory. A third incorrect approach is to make broad, unsubstantiated negative statements about a competitor or their services, even if based on hearsay or rumor. Such statements, if presented as fact and found to be false, can be considered defamatory per se in Alabama, meaning they are presumed to cause harm to reputation, thus satisfying the element of damages without specific proof of loss. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama must adopt a proactive risk management strategy when communicating about individuals or other entities. This involves a thorough understanding of the elements of defamation, a false statement of fact, publication, fault, and damages. Before making any statement that could be construed as factual, professionals should ask, is this statement true and can I prove it? And could this statement be interpreted as a factual assertion rather than an opinion? When in doubt, it is prudent to err on the side of caution, qualify statements as opinions, or refrain from making them altogether. Seeking legal counsel for complex communication strategies is also a vital part of professional decision-making. Question 3. The investigation demonstrates that a former employee of an Alabama-based technology firm has made public statements alleging serious financial misconduct by the company's CEO. The former employee claims to have direct knowledge of fraudulent accounting practices. Before the company issues a formal response, what is the most prudent course of action for the company's communications team to take regarding the factual accuracy of the allegations? Option A. Rely on the personal assurances of senior management that the allegations are baseless and proceed with a public statement based on their word. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive internal audit and gather all relevant financial records and documentation to independently verify or refute each specific allegation of financial misconduct. Option C. Immediately issue a strong public denial of all allegations, emphasizing the former employee's disgruntled status and potential motives for making false claims. Option D. Prepare a public statement that frames the allegations as mere speculation and opinion, without directly addressing the specific claims of fraudulent accounting practices. Correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive internal audit and gather all relevant financial records and documentation to independently verify or refute each specific allegation of financial misconduct. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the potential for significant reputational damage and legal repercussions for the individuals and the organization involved. The core issue revolves around the dissemination of information that may be factually inaccurate and harmful, requiring careful judgment to navigate the complexities of Alabama defamation law. The professional's responsibility is to ensure that any statements made are truthful, well-supported, and do not unjustly harm another's reputation. The best professional practice involves a thorough and objective verification of all factual assertions before any statement is made public. This approach prioritizes accuracy and adherence to legal standards by ensuring that any claim of fact is demonstrably true or, at minimum, based on credible evidence that would lead a reasonable person to believe it to be true. In Alabama, a false statement of fact that harms another's reputation is the cornerstone of a defamation claim. Therefore, meticulously confirming the truthfulness of each element of the statement is paramount to avoiding liability. This proactive stance aligns with the ethical obligation to act with integrity and to prevent the spread of misinformation. An approach that relies on hearsay or uncorroborated allegations is professionally unacceptable. In Alabama, a plaintiff need only prove the statement was false and caused harm to their reputation. Relying on rumor or unsubstantiated claims, even if believed to be true by the speaker, does not shield one from liability if the statement is, in fact, false. This failure to verify constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical lapse, as it bypasses the fundamental requirement of factual accuracy in public statements. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to make statements based on personal opinion or belief without a factual basis. While opinions are generally protected, if they are presented as factual assertions or imply underlying facts that are false, they can form the basis of a defamation claim. Alabama law distinguishes between statements of opinion and statements of fact, but the line can be blurred, especially when the opinion is presented in a way that suggests it is grounded in verifiable truth. This approach risks misrepresenting reality and causing unwarranted harm. Finally, an approach that involves making statements with reckless disregard for the truth is also professionally unacceptable. This means making a statement without knowing whether it is true or false, or having serious doubts about its truthfulness, but publishing it anyway. Such conduct can lead to punitive damages in Alabama defamation cases and demonstrates a severe ethical failure to uphold professional standards of diligence and truthfulness. The professional reasoning framework for such situations should involve a multi-step process. First, identify the core factual assertions being considered for dissemination. Second, rigorously investigate and verify each assertion using credible sources. Third, assess whether the statement, if made, could be construed as false and harmful to an individual's or entity's reputation under Alabama law. Fourth, consult with legal counsel if there is any uncertainty regarding the truthfulness or potential defamatory nature of the statement. This systematic approach ensures that professional conduct remains within legal and ethical boundaries. Question 4. Analysis of a situation in Alabama where a local business owner, known within their community for their involvement in a contentious town council debate regarding zoning changes, is considering a defamation lawsuit. The business owner is not a politician, celebrity, or elected official. What is the most accurate classification of this business owner under Alabama defamation law for the purposes of determining the legal standard for their defamation claim? Option A, a public figure because their involvement in a town council debate has made them a subject of public interest. Option B, A limited-purpose public figure if their involvement in the zoning debate was voluntary and they have access to channels of communication to rebut defamatory statements. Option C. A private individual, as they have not achieved pervasive fame or notoriety and are not a public official. Option D. A private individual, because they are not a celebrity or elected official. The correct answer is C. A private individual, as they have not achieved pervasive fame or notoriety and are not a public official. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of who qualifies as a private individual under Alabama Defamation Law. Misclassifying a public figure as a private individual can lead to incorrect legal strategies, potentially exposing a client to unnecessary litigation risks or failing to protect them adequately. The core difficulty lies in applying the legal definition to a real-world situation where the lines between public and private can be blurred. Careful judgment is required to assess the extent of an individual's public involvement and their expectation of privacy. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough assessment of the individual's status based on Alabama's defamation law, specifically focusing on whether they have thrust themselves into a public controversy or are otherwise a public figure. This approach correctly identifies that a person is considered a private individual if they have not voluntarily injected themselves into a public controversy, nor achieved pervasive fame or notoriety. The legal standard in Alabama for private individuals generally requires a lower burden of proof for defamation claims compared to public figures, who must prove actual malice. Therefore, accurately determining private individual status is crucial for framing the legal argument and assessing the strength of a defamation claim. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that any individual not holding elected office or working in a highly visible public service role is automatically a private individual. This fails to account for individuals who, through their actions or involvement in specific public issues, may have voluntarily become public figures in relation to those issues, even if they are not generally famous. Alabama law, like many jurisdictions, recognizes limited-purpose public figures. Another incorrect approach is to equate a lack of widespread fame with private individual status. While pervasive fame is a hallmark of a public figure, individuals can become public figures for specific controversies without being nationally recognized. This approach overlooks the possibility of limited-purpose public figures who have voluntarily engaged with matters of public concern. A further incorrect approach is to base the classification solely on the individual's personal desire for privacy. While a desire for privacy is a factor, the legal definition of a private individual under Alabama law is primarily determined by their actions and their involvement in public affairs, not solely by their subjective wishes. The law focuses on whether the individual has taken actions that have invited public attention or comment. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process when determining an individual's status for defamation purposes. This process begins with a comprehensive factual investigation into the individual's public activities, their involvement in any relevant controversies, and the extent to which they have sought or received public attention. This factual understanding should then be rigorously applied to the legal definitions and precedents established under Alabama defamation law concerning private individuals and public figures, including limited-purpose public figures. If there is ambiguity, seeking clarification through legal research and consultation is paramount. Question 5. Consider a scenario in Alabama where a local newspaper publishes an article containing false statements about a prominent city council member who is considered a public figure. The article alleges financial impropriety. The journalist who wrote the article relied on information from an anonymous source without independently verifying all the details. If the city council member sues for defamation, what is the most appropriate legal standard the court will likely apply to determine the newspaper's liability? Option A. The newspaper will be liable if the city council member proves the statements were false and that the newspaper acted with actual malice, meaning the publisher knew the statement was false or acted with reckless disregard for its truth or falsity. Option B. The newspaper will be liable if the city council member proves the statements were false, regardless of the newspaper's intent or the journalist's level of care. Option C. The newspaper will be liable if the city council member proves the statements were false and that the newspaper acted with negligence in verifying the information. Option D. The newspaper will be liable if the city council member proves the statements were false and that the journalist failed to exercise reasonable care in gathering the information. The correct answer is C. The newspaper will be liable if the city council member proves the statements were false and that the newspaper acted with negligence in verifying the information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama's defamation law, specifically the distinction between negligence and actual malice, which is crucial for determining liability when a public figure is involved. The journalist must balance the public's right to information with the potential harm to an individual's reputation, necessitating careful consideration of the evidence and the plaintiff's status. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough assessment of the plaintiff's status under Alabama law. If the plaintiff is a public figure, the journalist must demonstrate that the defamatory statement was made with actual malice, meaning the publisher knew the statement was false or acted with reckless disregard for whether it was false or not. This standard, established in New York Times Co. v. Sullivan and applied in Alabama, protects robust public debate. If the plaintiff is a private figure, the standard is generally negligence, meaning the publisher failed to exercise reasonable care in verifying the truth of the statement. The journalist's approach should therefore be to first determine the plaintiff's status and then apply the corresponding fault standard. This aligns with Alabama's legal framework for defamation claims. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that all defamatory statements about public figures are automatically actionable if they are false. This fails to recognize the higher burden of proof required for public figures under Alabama law, which is actual malice, not mere negligence. This approach risks frivolous lawsuits and chilling legitimate reporting. Another incorrect approach is to apply the negligence standard to a public figure without considering the actual malice requirement. This would lead to an incorrect legal analysis and potentially expose the publisher to liability that would not be upheld under Alabama's defamation jurisprudence. A further incorrect approach is to focus solely on the falsity of the statement without adequately investigating the publisher's state of mind or the plaintiff's status. While falsity is a necessary element of defamation, it is not sufficient on its own, especially when dealing with public figures, where the fault element is paramount. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the plaintiff and their status, public figure or private individual. Second, determine the nature of the statement and whether it is defamatory. Third, apply the appropriate fault standard based on the plaintiff's status and the evidence available regarding the publisher's conduct. This structured analysis ensures compliance with Alabama's specific legal requirements and ethical considerations. Question 6. During the evaluation of potential defamation claim in Alabama, a client reports that a former colleague verbally accused them of stealing company property during a team meeting. The accusation was heard by several other employees. What is the most accurate legal classification of this alleged defamatory statement under Alabama law? Option A. Not defamatory, as it was a verbal statement made in a meeting. Option B. Libel, because the accusation was made in a permanent form. Option C. Slander per se, due to the oral accusation of criminal conduct. Option D. Defamation of character without distinguishing between libel and slander. The correct answer is C. Slander per se, due to the oral accusation of criminal conduct. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama defamation law, specifically distinguishing between libel and slander, and applying these distinctions to a real-world communication context. The professional must accurately categorize the alleged defamatory statement to advise the client appropriately regarding potential legal recourse under Alabama law. The best approach involves correctly identifying the statement as slander per se. This approach is correct because the statement, as described, is an oral accusation of criminal conduct, theft. Under Alabama law, false and defamatory statements that impute criminal behavior are considered slander per se. This classification is crucial because it allows the plaintiff to recover damages without needing to prove specific financial harm, special damages, which would otherwise be a significant hurdle in a slander claim. The Alabama Code, particularly sections related to defamation, supports this distinction and the presumption of damages for slander per se. An incorrect approach would be to classify the statement as libel. This is professionally unacceptable because libel, under Alabama law, refers to defamatory statements published in a permanent form, such as writing, printing, or broadcasting. The scenario explicitly states the statement was made verbally, making it an oral communication and thus not libel. Misclassifying it as libel would lead to incorrect legal advice regarding the elements of the claim and the potential for damages. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the statement as not defamatory without further analysis. This is professionally unacceptable because the statement directly accuses the individual of a crime, which, if false and communicated to a third party, meets the basic definition of defamation in Alabama. Failing to recognize the potential for slander per se would deprive the client of valid legal options and demonstrate a lack of diligence. A further incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the intent of the speaker rather than the nature and impact of the statement. While intent can be relevant in defamation cases, the primary classification of the statement as libel or slander, and whether it constitutes slander per se, hinges on the form of communication and the content of the accusation, as defined by Alabama law. Overemphasizing intent without first correctly categorizing the statement's type would lead to a flawed legal analysis. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the alleged defamatory statement's content and the medium through which it was communicated. They must then consult the specific definitions and classifications of libel and slander under Alabama law. Identifying whether the statement falls into a category of slander per se is a critical step that significantly impacts the legal strategy and the potential for recovery. This systematic approach ensures accurate legal advice grounded in the relevant jurisdiction statutes and case law. Question 7. Research into Alabama defamation law reveals a scenario where a prominent local politician, Mayor Thompson, is publicly criticized by a local newspaper editor in an opinion piece. The editor writes, "Mayor Thompson's recent decision to rezone the downtown district appears to be driven by personal financial gain rather than the best interests of the city." This statement is published in the newspaper and widely circulated. Considering the definition of defamation under Alabama law, which of the following best evaluates the potential defamatory nature of the editor's statement? Option A. The statement is potentially defamatory because it alleges a false and damaging motive, personal financial gain, that could injure Mayor Thompson's reputation and expose him to public contempt, and its truth or falsity is a question of fact. Option B. The statement is not defamatory because Mayor Thompson is a public figure, and the editor's statement does not meet the high standard of actual malice required for public figures. Option C. The statement is not defamatory because the editor's intent was to express a critical viewpoint, and the focus should be on the speaker's intent rather than the statement's potential impact. Option D. The statement is not defamatory because it is an opinion piece and therefore protected speech, regardless of its content or potential impact on the mayor's reputation. The correct answer is A. The statement is potentially defamatory because it alleges a false and damaging motive, personal financial gain, that could injure Mayor Thompson's reputation and expose him to public contempt, and its truth or falsity is a question of fact. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama defamation law, specifically the definition of a defamatory statement. In the context of potentially protected speech, a careful judgment is required to distinguish between statements that are merely offensive or critical and those that rise to the level of defamation, which can cause reputational harm. The best professional approach involves a thorough analysis of the statement's content and context against the legal definition of defamation under Alabama law. This approach correctly identifies that a defamatory statement in Alabama is one that is false, published to a third party, and tends to injure the reputation of the person about whom it is made, or exposes them to hatred, contempt, or ridicule. It requires assessing whether the statement, if proven false, would actually harm the plaintiff's reputation in the eyes of a respectable segment of the community. This aligns with the core principles of Alabama defamation law, which protects individuals from false and damaging statements that harm their standing. An incorrect approach would be to assume that any negative or critical statement about a public figure is automatically defamatory. This fails to recognize the higher burden of proof required for public figures in defamation cases, actual malice, and overlooks the fact that criticism, even harsh criticism, is often protected speech. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the speaker's intent or the listener's subjective reaction, without considering the objective impact on the plaintiff's reputation within the community. Alabama law requires an objective assessment of how the statement would be perceived by a reasonable person. Finally, an approach that dismisses the statement as mere opinion without analyzing its factual assertions is also flawed. While opinions are generally protected, statements that imply the existence of undisclosed defamatory facts are not. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific elements of defamation under Alabama law. This involves analyzing the statement's falsity, publication, and defamatory nature. For public figures, the additional element of actual malice must also be considered. The framework should also involve evaluating the context in which the statement was made and the potential impact on the plaintiff's reputation. This systematic approach ensures that legal standards are met and that protected speech is not wrongly penalized. Question 8. The risk matrix shows a potential defamation claim arising from an investigative report published in the Birmingham Chronicle concerning alleged financial improprieties by a local business owner. The report relies heavily on anonymous sources and presents some allegations as established facts without definitive proof. What is the most prudent course of action for the Birmingham Chronicle's editorial team to mitigate potential defamation liability under Alabama law? Option A. Publish the report as is, but prepare to issue a retraction only if a formal defamation lawsuit is filed by the business owner. Option B. Immediately issue a retraction of the entire report and conduct a comprehensive internal review of the editorial process that led to its publication. Option C. Proceed with publishing the report, relying on the belief that the allegations are true and that the public interest in the information outweighs the risk of a lawsuit. Option D. Publish the report, but add a disclaimer stating that the information is based on anonymous sources and may not be entirely accurate. The correct answer is B. Immediately issue a retraction of the entire report and conduct a comprehensive internal review of the editorial process that led to its publication. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a potential defamation claim arising from a recent investigative report published in the Birmingham Chronicle. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the public's right to know with the potential for reputational harm to the subject of the report. A journalist's duty is to report truthfully and accurately, but errors in investigation or reporting can lead to significant legal consequences under Alabama defamation law. Careful judgment is required to ensure all facts are verified and presented in a fair and non-malicious manner. The best professional approach involves a thorough pre-publication review process that prioritizes factual accuracy and legal defensibility. This includes verifying all sources, cross-referencing information, and ensuring that any opinions expressed are clearly distinguished from factual assertions. Furthermore, seeking legal counsel to review potentially sensitive content before publication is a critical step in mitigating defamation risk. This proactive measure allows for the identification and correction of any statements that could be construed as false and damaging, thereby adhering to the principles of responsible journalism and Alabama's defamation statutes, which require a false statement of fact that harms reputation. An incorrect approach would be to publish the report without adequate fact-checking, relying solely on the word of a single source. This fails to meet the standard of reasonable care expected of journalists and significantly increases the risk of publishing false information, a key element in a defamation claim under Alabama law. Another unacceptable approach is to publish the report with the intention of issuing a retraction only if a lawsuit is filed. This demonstrates a disregard for the potential harm caused to the individual or entity being defamed, and an unwillingness to take responsibility for journalistic accuracy, which is contrary to ethical reporting standards and the spirit of defamation law. Finally, publishing the report based on a strong personal belief in its truthfulness, without independent verification, is also professionally unsound. While belief in truth is a defense, it must be based on reasonable grounds and diligent investigation, not mere personal conviction. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes due diligence, verification, and risk assessment at every stage of the reporting process. This involves establishing clear editorial policies, providing ongoing training on legal and ethical standards, and fostering a culture where questioning and verification are encouraged. When in doubt about the accuracy or potential legal implications of a story, seeking expert advice, including legal review, should be the default action. Question 9. The assessment process reveals a situation where a local politician in Alabama is alleged to have made a false and damaging statement about a business owner during a live televised town hall meeting. The business owner is considering legal action and seeks advice on the nature of the defamation. Which of the following best categorizes the alleged defamation under Alabama law and guides the initial legal strategy? Option A. The alleged defamation is libel, as it was made in a public forum, and the legal strategy should focus on the permanence of the broadcast recording. Option B. The alleged defamation is likely slander, as it was spoken during a live broadcast, and the primary legal strategy should focus on proving the spoken words and their immediate impact. Option C. The alleged defamation is libel, as any statement made to a large audience is considered a permanent publication. Option D. The alleged defamation is slander, as the spoken word is inherently transient, regardless of any recording. The correct answer is B. The alleged defamation is likely slander, as it was spoken during a live broadcast, and the primary legal strategy should focus on proving the spoken words and their immediate impact. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the nuanced distinction between libel and slander under Alabama law, particularly when dealing with potentially defamatory statements made in a public forum. Careful judgment is required to correctly categorize the alleged defamation, as the legal remedies and burdens of proof differ significantly between the two. The best professional approach involves accurately identifying the form of defamation based on its medium of communication. This approach correctly recognizes that libel, under Alabama law, refers to defamatory statements published in a permanent or semi-permanent form, such as written words, print, pictures, or broadcasts. Slander, conversely, is defamatory speech that is transient in nature. Applying this distinction is crucial for advising clients on the appropriate legal avenues and potential outcomes. An incorrect approach would be to broadly categorize all defamatory statements as libel simply because they were made publicly. This fails to acknowledge the specific legal definition of slander as spoken defamation, which is a distinct tort under Alabama law. This approach risks misadvising a client, potentially leading them to pursue a claim with an incorrect legal framework and burden of proof, thereby undermining their case. Another incorrect approach is to assume that any defamatory statement made online, regardless of its format, constitutes slander. Online content can be ephemeral. Many online publications, such as blog posts, social media updates, or website articles, are preserved in a written or visual format, aligning them with the definition of libel. This approach overlooks the permanence aspect inherent in libel. A further incorrect approach is to conflate the severity of the defamatory statement with its classification as libel or slander. While the impact of a statement is relevant to damages, it does not determine whether the defamation is libelous or slanderous. The classification hinges solely on the medium of publication. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of the alleged defamatory statement's content, and critically, its medium of publication. Professionals must then apply the specific definitions of libel and slander as defined by Alabama statutes and case law. This involves asking, was the statement written, printed, broadcast, or otherwise recorded in a permanent or semi-permanent form libel, or was it purely spoken and transient slander? This precise categorization is the foundation for sound legal advice and strategy. Question 10. The assessment process reveals that a prominent business owner in Birmingham, Alabama, has sued a local newspaper for defamation, alleging that a published article contained false statements about their business practices. The newspaper claims the article was protected by a qualified privilege. If the court finds that the business owner has successfully proven actual malice on the part of the newspaper, what is the most appropriate method for calculating the compensatory damages awarded to the business owner, assuming they can demonstrate specific financial harm? Option A. Award damages based on the perceived malicious intent of the defendant, without requiring specific proof of economic loss. Option B. Calculate total compensatory damages by summing the plaintiff's proven economic losses directly attributable to the defamatory statements, supported by financial records and expert testimony. Option C. Apply a predetermined statutory damage amount for each proven instance of actual malice, regardless of the plaintiff's actual financial harm. Option D. Multiply the number of false statements by a nominal per statement value, without requiring evidence of actual financial impact. The correct answer is B. Calculate total compensatory damages by summing the plaintiff's proven economic losses directly attributable to the defamatory statements, supported by financial records and expert testimony. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a precise understanding of Alabama's qualified privilege defense in defamation cases, specifically concerning the calculation of damages when a plaintiff attempts to overcome this privilege by proving actual malice. The difficulty lies in accurately applying the legal standard for proving actual malice, and then translating that into a quantifiable financial impact on the plaintiff, which is essential for determining the appropriate award of damages. Professionals must navigate the nuances of Alabama law to ensure any awarded damages are both legally sound and ethically justifiable, reflecting the actual harm suffered due to the defamatory statement, if the privilege is indeed overcome. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a meticulous calculation of the plaintiff's proven economic losses directly attributable to the defamatory statement, after establishing that the statement was made with actual malice, thereby overcoming the qualified privilege. This approach correctly recognizes that even when a privilege is overcome, damages must be demonstrably linked to the defamation. In Alabama, once a qualified privilege is established, the burden shifts to the plaintiff to prove actual malice. If actual malice is proven, the privilege is defeated, and the plaintiff can recover damages. However, the damages awarded must still be compensatory and directly flow from the defamatory publication. This means calculating quantifiable losses such as lost income, lost business opportunities, or other demonstrable financial harm. The formula for compensatory damages in such a case would be total compensatory damages equals proven economic losses plus proven non-economic losses, if applicable and proven. The calculation should focus on the direct financial impact, as demonstrated by evidence such as financial statements, expert testimony on lost profits, or documented loss of clients. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to award damages based solely on the perceived intent of the defendant to harm the plaintiff, without a rigorous calculation of actual economic losses. This fails to adhere to Alabama's defamation law, which requires demonstrable harm to justify damages, even when actual malice is present. Ethically, it can lead to punitive awards not tied to actual injury, which is unjust. Another incorrect approach is to award damages based on a fixed statutory amount for any proven instance of actual malice, irrespective of the plaintiff's actual financial harm. Alabama law does not prescribe such a fixed statutory amount for overcoming qualified privilege. Damages are intended to compensate for actual losses. This approach disregards the principle of proportionality between the harm suffered and the compensation awarded. A further incorrect approach is to calculate damages by simply multiplying the number of defamatory statements by a nominal per statement value, without any evidence of actual financial impact. This method is arbitrary and does not reflect the legal standard for proving damages in defamation cases in Alabama, which requires a causal link between the defamation and the plaintiff's financial detriment. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such cases by first identifying whether a qualified privilege exists under Alabama law. If it does, the next critical step is to assess whether the plaintiff has presented sufficient evidence to prove actual malice. If actual malice is proven, the privilege is defeated. The subsequent calculation of damages must then be grounded in a thorough analysis of the plaintiff's demonstrable economic losses directly resulting from the defamatory statement. This involves gathering and analyzing financial records, expert opinions, and other evidence that quantifies the harm. The decision-making process should prioritize adherence to legal standards for proving both actual malice and damages, ensuring that any award is fair, just, and legally defensible. Question 11. The assessment process reveals that the Montgomery Chronicle, a newspaper operating in Alabama, published an article containing factual inaccuracies that defamed a local restaurant owner. The owner has formally requested a retraction, specifying the false statements and providing the correct information. Considering Alabama Defamation Law, which of the following actions by the Montgomery Chronicle best represents a professionally sound and legally prudent response to mitigate potential damages? Option A. Publish a full and unequivocal retraction of the false statements, clearly identifying the erroneous information and correcting it with accurate facts as soon as practicable after receiving the request. Option B. Publish a retraction that only addresses a portion of the factual inaccuracies identified by the restaurant owner, while omitting corrections for other false statements. Option C. Respond to the restaurant owner with a statement disputing the factual inaccuracies and arguing the original publication was substantially true, without issuing any retraction. Option D. Ignore the retraction request from the restaurant owner, believing the original article was substantially true. Correct answer is A. Publish a full and unequivocal retraction of the false statements, clearly identifying the erroneous information and correcting it with accurate facts, as soon as practicable after receiving the request. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario where a local Alabama newspaper published a defamatory article about a small business owner. The business owner, Mr. Henderson, has provided the newspaper with a clear and unequivocal retraction request, citing specific factual inaccuracies in the original publication. The challenge lies in determining the newspaper's optimal response to mitigate potential legal liability under Alabama Defamation Law, particularly concerning the impact of a retraction on damages. Alabama law, like many jurisdictions, recognizes that a timely and proper retraction can serve as a defense, or at least significantly reduce punitive and general damages. The professional challenge is to balance the desire to correct a journalistic error with the potential financial and reputational consequences of defamation, all while adhering to the specific requirements for a retraction to be legally effective in Alabama. The best professional approach involves promptly publishing a full and unequivocal retraction of the false statements, clearly identifying the erroneous information, and correcting it with accurate facts. This approach aligns with Alabama Code Section 6-5-184, which outlines the conditions under which a retraction can limit damages. By issuing a full retraction, the newspaper demonstrates good faith and a commitment to accuracy, which is crucial for mitigating punitive and general damages. This proactive measure directly addresses the legal requirements for a retraction to be considered in reducing the plaintiff's recovery, thereby minimizing the newspaper's exposure to substantial financial penalties. An approach that involves publishing a partial retraction, only correcting some of the inaccuracies while ignoring others, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the full and unequivocal standard required by Alabama law for effective damage mitigation. It suggests a lack of commitment to rectifying the entire error and could be interpreted by a court as an attempt to circumvent the retraction statute, thus negating its protective effect. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to ignore the retraction request entirely. This demonstrates a disregard for the legal rights of the defamed party and a failure to acknowledge a potential error. Under Alabama law, failing to retract when requested, especially when the original publication was erroneous, leaves the newspaper fully exposed to all potential damages, including punitive damages, without any mitigating factor. This is a significant ethical and legal failing. Finally, responding to the retraction request with a statement that disputes the factual inaccuracies or argues the original publication was substantially true without issuing a retraction is also professionally unsound. While the newspaper may believe its original reporting was accurate, the legal standard for a retraction's effectiveness is to correct the false statements. Arguing the truth of the original publication while refusing to retract the demonstrably false portions undermines the purpose of a retraction and leaves the newspaper vulnerable to damages. The professional decision-making process should prioritize understanding and adhering to the specific statutory requirements for retractions in Alabama to minimize legal exposure and uphold journalistic integrity. Question 12. In Alabama, a former employee, Ms. Adams, is suing her ex-employer, Mr. Baker, for defamation. Mr. Baker, in a private meeting with a prospective employer of Ms. Adams, stated that Ms. Adams was difficult to work with and often missed deadlines. These statements were made after Mr. Baker had received a formal complaint from Ms. Adams regarding workplace harassment by another employee, which he had not fully investigated. Which approach would be most appropriate for Mr. Baker's legal defense in Alabama? Option A. Contending that Ms. Adams's reputation was already damaged due to unrelated personal issues, and therefore the statements made by Mr. Baker did not cause significant harm. Option B. Asserting the defense of qualified privilege, arguing that his statements were made in good faith to a party with a legitimate interest in Ms. Adams's work performance, and demonstrating that he did not act with actual malice. Option C. relying solely on the defense of truth, asserting that Ms. Adams was indeed difficult to work with and missed deadlines, without providing specific evidence to support these claims. Option D, arguing that the statements made were merely expressions of opinion and not factual assertions, without further analysis of whether these opinions implied undisclosed defamatory facts. The correct answer is B, asserting the defense of qualified privilege, arguing that his statements were made in good faith to a party with a legitimate interest in Ms. Adams's work performance, and demonstrating that he did not act with actual malice. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama defamation law, specifically the defenses available to a defendant. The plaintiff has presented a prima facie case, and the defendant's response hinges on the successful invocation of a recognized defense. Careful judgment is required to determine which defense, if any, is most applicable and likely to succeed under Alabama's legal standards, considering the specific facts presented. The best professional approach involves a thorough assessment of the facts against the elements of the qualified privilege defense as recognized in Alabama. This defense protects statements made in good faith on any subject matter in which the party making the statement has an interest, or in reference to which he has a duty, to a person having a corresponding interest or duty. In Alabama, this privilege is not absolute and can be overcome by a showing of actual malice, meaning the statement was made with knowledge of its falsity or with reckless disregard for the truth. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the defendant's potential legal protection under established Alabama case law, focusing on the factual basis for the privilege and the crucial element of malice. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the defense of truth without further substantiation. While truth is an absolute defense to defamation in Alabama, simply asserting its truth without presenting evidence or demonstrating its applicability to the specific statements made is insufficient. This fails to meet the burden of proof required to establish the defense and ignores the possibility that the statements, even if partially true, could still be defamatory if presented with malice or in a misleading context. Another incorrect approach would be to assert the defense of opinion without careful consideration of Alabama's legal standard for distinguishing between fact and opinion. In Alabama, statements of opinion are generally protected, but if an opinion implies the existence of undisclosed defamatory facts, it can still be actionable. Merely labeling a statement as opinion without analyzing whether it implies factual assertions that are false and defamatory is a flawed strategy. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to argue that the plaintiff's reputation was already poor, thus mitigating damages. While a plaintiff's pre-existing poor reputation can be a factor in assessing damages, it does not serve as a defense to the act of defamation itself under Alabama law. This approach misapplies the concept of damages mitigation as a complete defense to liability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive factual investigation. This is followed by a detailed legal analysis of the elements of the plaintiff's claim and the potential defenses available under Alabama law. Each potential defense must be evaluated against the gathered facts, considering the specific legal standards and evidentiary burdens required in Alabama. This systematic approach ensures that legal strategies are grounded in established law and tailored to the unique circumstances of the case. Question 13. Investigation of a potential defamation claim in Alabama concerning a statement made by a former employee about a current employee to a single colleague during a private conversation in the office break room. What is the most critical factor to establish for the claim to proceed under Alabama defamation law? Option A. Documentation of the plaintiff's emotional distress resulting from the statement. Option B. A written confession from the defendant admitting to making the statement. Option C. Proof that the statement was heard or read by at least one person other than the plaintiff. Option D. Evidence that the statement was widely disseminated on social media platforms. The correct answer is C. Proof that the statement was heard or read by at least one person other than the plaintiff. Explanation. Investigation of a potential defamation claim in Alabama requires careful consideration of the element of publication. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves assessing whether a statement, even if false and damaging, has been communicated to a third party in a manner that constitutes publication under Alabama law. The nuance lies in determining what constitutes a third party and the intent or negligence behind the communication. The best professional approach involves a thorough factual investigation to ascertain if the allegedly defamatory statement was communicated to at least one person other than the plaintiff. This includes examining all potential avenues of communication, such as spoken words, written documents, emails, social media posts, or any other medium that could convey the statement to a third party. Alabama law, consistent with general defamation principles, requires proof of publication to a third person. This means the statement must have been heard or read by someone other than the defamed individual. The focus is on the act of communication itself, regardless of whether the third party believed the statement or acted upon it. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the core legal requirement for publication in Alabama defamation cases, as established by common law and codified in relevant statutes and case law. An incorrect approach would be to assume publication has occurred simply because a statement was made, without verifying its communication to a third party. This fails to meet the fundamental legal threshold for defamation. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the falsity and damaging nature of the statement, neglecting the essential element of publication. While falsity and damages are crucial elements of a defamation claim, they are insufficient without proof that the statement was communicated to a third party. Relying on the plaintiff's assertion of harm without independent verification of communication to others also constitutes an inadequate approach, as it bypasses the necessary factual predicate for a defamation claim. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with identifying all elements of a defamation claim under Alabama law. A false and defamatory statement, publication to a third party, fault on the part of the defendant, and damages. The initial focus should always be on gathering evidence to prove or disprove each element. In the context of publication, this means meticulously investigating the circumstances of the statement's dissemination and seeking, corroborating evidence of its communication to third parties. Question 14. Assessment of journalistic due diligence in Alabama when reporting on allegations of misconduct against a prominent local politician, considering the legal protections afforded to public figures. Option A. The journalist must demonstrate that they had a genuine belief in the truth of the allegations at the time of publication, or that they acted with reckless disregard for whether the allegations were true or false, to avoid liability for defamation under Alabama law. Option B. The journalist is absolved of any defamation liability if the allegations, even if false, are of significant public interest and concern the politician's official duties. Option C. The journalist can publish the allegations if they are presented as opinion or commentary, regardless of their factual basis, as long as they are critical of the politician's public performance. Option D. The journalist needs only to show that they acted reasonably in gathering the information, and that a reasonably prudent person would have published the allegations under similar circumstances. The correct answer is A. The journalist must demonstrate that they had a genuine belief in the truth of the allegations at the time of publication, or that they acted with reckless disregard for whether the allegations were true or false, to avoid liability for defamation under Alabama law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama defamation law, specifically the heightened burden of proof for public figures. A journalist must balance the public's right to information with the potential harm to an individual's reputation, all while navigating the legal standards designed to protect free speech. Misapplying the standard of proof can lead to significant legal repercussions for the journalist and their publication. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves rigorously applying the actual malice standard when reporting on public figures in Alabama. This means the journalist must have a reasonable basis to believe, at the time of publication, that the information was true, or they must have acted with reckless disregard for the truth. This standard, established by the U.S. Supreme Court and applicable in Alabama, protects robust public debate by making it harder for public officials and figures to win defamation suits. The ethical imperative is to ensure that reporting, even if critical, is grounded in a genuine belief in its truth or a diligent effort to ascertain it, thereby safeguarding both reputation and the integrity of journalism. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to treat the public figure as if they were a private individual and only need to prove negligence. This fails to acknowledge the specific legal protections afforded to public figures under Alabama law, which require a showing of actual malice. Another incorrect approach is to assume that because a statement is critical or unflattering, it automatically meets the standard for defamation against a public figure. This overlooks the requirement of proving the speaker's subjective state of mind knowledge of falsity or reckless disregard for the truth. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to publish information based on a single, uncorroborated source without any further verification, even if the source claims the information is true, as this could easily fall into reckless disregard for the truth if reasonable steps were not taken to confirm its accuracy. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should first identify the status of the individual being reported on, public figure vs. private individual. If the individual is a public figure, the journalist must then meticulously gather evidence and assess whether their reporting meets the actual malice standard. This involves documenting the sources of information, the steps taken to verify facts, and the journalist's own belief in the truthfulness of the statements at the time of publication. When in doubt, seeking legal counsel before publication is a critical step in mitigating risk and ensuring compliance with Alabama defamation law. Question 15. Benchmark analysis indicates that a prominent Alabama-based business has discovered allegedly defamatory statements about its operations posted on a website hosted by a company located in France. The website is accessible globally, including within Alabama. The French company has no physical presence or employees in Alabama. Considering Alabama defamation law and international jurisdiction principles, what is the most appropriate initial step for the Alabama business to take to pursue a defamation claim against the French company? Option A. Recommend that the Alabama business abandon any attempt to sue the French company, as international companies with no physical presence in Alabama are immune from Alabama defamation lawsuits. Option B. Conduct a detailed legal analysis to determine if the French company's online activities constitute sufficient minimum contacts with Alabama to establish personal jurisdiction under Alabama's long-arm statute and due process. Option C. Focus solely on gathering evidence of the defamatory nature of the statements, assuming that the international nature of the publication automatically grants jurisdiction in Alabama if the statements are proven false and damaging. Option D. Immediately advise the Alabama business to file a defamation lawsuit against the French company in France, as French courts are the only appropriate venue for claims against a French entity. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed legal analysis to determine if the French company's online activities constitute sufficient minimum contacts with Alabama to establish personal jurisdiction under Alabama's long-arm statute and due process. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the cross-border nature of the alleged defamation. Alabama law governs the conduct within the state, but the reach of the internet means the publication could be accessed and potentially cause harm in other jurisdictions. Determining the appropriate legal framework and jurisdiction for a defamation claim involving international elements requires careful consideration of Alabama's specific defamation statutes and relevant principles of international law concerning jurisdiction. The professional must navigate the complexities of where a claim can be brought and under which law it will be adjudicated, balancing the rights of the alleged defamed party with the practicalities of international litigation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough analysis of Alabama's long-arm statute and relevant case law concerning jurisdiction over out-of-state or international defendants in defamation cases. This includes assessing whether the defendant's online activities constitute sufficient minimum contacts with Alabama to establish personal jurisdiction. The analysis should also consider the potential application of the effects test or targeting test if the defendant's actions, though occurring elsewhere, were intended to cause harm within Alabama. This approach is correct because it prioritizes adherence to Alabama's jurisdictional rules and established legal precedent, ensuring any legal action is properly grounded within the state's judicial authority. It directly addresses the core legal question of whether Alabama courts have the power to hear the case against an international entity. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that because the defamatory content was published online by an international entity, Alabama courts automatically lack jurisdiction. This fails to acknowledge that Alabama's long-arm statute is designed to extend jurisdiction to the limits permitted by due process, which can include defendants with significant online presence and impact within the state. Another incorrect approach is to immediately advise filing suit in the defendant's home country without first assessing Alabama's jurisdictional reach. While litigation in the defendant's jurisdiction might be a necessary step, if Alabama jurisdiction cannot be established, it bypasses the crucial initial analysis of whether Alabama courts are a viable venue. This could prejudice the client by prematurely abandoning a potentially advantageous forum. A further incorrect approach is to focus solely on the content of the alleged defamation without considering the jurisdictional nexus. While the nature of the defamatory statements is central to the defamation claim itself, it does not, on its own, establish jurisdiction over an international defendant. Jurisdiction is a threshold issue that must be satisfied before the merits of the defamation claim can be addressed. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a scenario should employ a systematic legal analysis. First, they must identify the governing law, Alabama Defamation Law. Second, they must determine if Alabama courts have personal jurisdiction over the international defendant. This involves a detailed examination of Alabama's long-arm statute and constitutional due process requirements, specifically looking for minimum contacts and purposeful availment. Third, if jurisdiction is established, they must then assess the merits of the defamation claim under Alabama law. If Alabama jurisdiction is not feasible, the professional should then advise on alternative forums, such as the defendant's home jurisdiction, and the potential challenges of pursuing a claim there. This structured approach ensures all legal prerequisites are met and the client's best interests are served. Question 16. The evaluation methodology shows that when assessing a potential defamation claim in Alabama, a plaintiff alleges that a local business owner's reputation has been severely damaged by false statements published online by a competitor. The plaintiff claims the statements have led to a significant decrease in customer trust and business partnerships. Which of the following best represents the critical factor in establishing harm to reputation under Alabama defamation law? Option A. Relying on the business owner's personal belief that their reputation has been damaged without external evidence of community perception. Option B. Demonstrating that the false statements have objectively lowered the plaintiff's standing in the eyes of a respectable segment of the community, leading to tangible negative consequences. Option C. Establishing that the online statements were made with malice, regardless of their truthfulness or impact on the business owner's standing. Option D. Proving that the competitor intended to cause the business owner emotional distress through the online publications. The correct answer is B. Demonstrating that the false statements have objectively lowered the plaintiff's standing in the eyes of a respectable segment of the community, leading to tangible negative consequences. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that assessing harm to reputation in Alabama defamation law requires a nuanced understanding of how a false statement impacts an individual's standing in the community. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the protection of an individual's reputation against the principles of free speech and the difficulty in quantifying reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to determine if the alleged harm meets the legal threshold for defamation under Alabama law. The best professional approach involves a thorough examination of the specific statements made, their falsity, and the demonstrable impact on the plaintiff's reputation within their relevant community. This includes considering whether the statements were published to a third party, if they were understood to be about the plaintiff, and if they tended to harm the plaintiff's reputation in the eyes of a respectable segment of the community. Under Alabama law, harm to reputation is a core element of defamation. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal elements of defamation, focusing on the actual damage to the plaintiff's standing, which is a prerequisite for a successful claim. It aligns with Alabama Code Section 6-5-182, which defines libel and slander as false and malicious defamation of character, implying that actual harm is central to the claim. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the intent of the speaker without considering the actual impact on the plaintiff's reputation. Malice can be a factor in certain defamation cases, e.g., involving public figures. The fundamental requirement for proving defamation in Alabama is the harm to reputation caused by a false statement. Ignoring this element means failing to establish a prima facie case. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to assume that any negative statement, regardless of its truth or falsity, automatically constitutes defamation. Alabama law requires the statement to be false. If a statement is true, even if damaging to reputation, it is a complete defense to a defamation claim. Finally, an approach that relies on the plaintiff's subjective feelings of embarrassment or distress without demonstrating objective harm to their standing in the community is also flawed. While emotional distress can be a consequence of defamation, the legal claim for defamation itself hinges on the damage to reputation, not solely on the plaintiff's internal emotional state. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the alleged defamatory statement, verifying its falsity, and then meticulously investigating the demonstrable impact on the plaintiff's reputation within their social, professional, or community circles. This involves gathering evidence of how others perceive the plaintiff after the statement was made, and whether that perception has negatively changed. Question 17. Process analysis reveals that a financial advisor in Alabama is considering making a public statement about a prominent local business owner who has frequently engaged in public debates regarding local economic policy. The advisor believes the statement, if made, will be factually accurate but potentially damaging to the business owner's reputation. What is the most legally sound approach for the advisor to take regarding the potential defamation claim in Alabama? Option A. Apply the actual malice standard to the statement regardless of the business owner's status, as this provides the broadest protection against defamation claims. Option B. Assume the business owner is a private individual and proceed with the statement, provided it is factually accurate, as this is the lowest standard to defend against a defamation claim. Option C. Ascertain whether the business owner qualifies as a public figure under Alabama law, and if so, ensure the statement is made without actual malice. Otherwise, ensure the statement is made with reasonable care to verify its truth. Option D. Focus solely on the factual accuracy of the statement, as proving falsity is the primary hurdle for any defamation claim in Alabama. The correct answer is C. Ascertain whether the business owner qualifies as a public figure under Alabama law, and if so, ensure the statement is made without actual malice. Otherwise, ensure the statement is made with reasonable care to verify its truth. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama defamation law, specifically the distinction between public figures and private individuals, and how that distinction impacts the burden of proof. A financial advisor must exercise extreme care in making public statements about individuals, especially those who might be considered public figures, to avoid potential legal repercussions. Mischaracterizing an individual's status or misapplying the legal standards can lead to significant liability. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves accurately assessing the individual's status under Alabama law to determine the appropriate legal standard for defamation. If the individual is a public figure, the advisor must demonstrate that the statement was made with actual malice, meaning the advisor knew the statement was false or acted with reckless disregard for whether it was false or not. This high standard reflects the First Amendment's protection of speech concerning public figures. If the individual is a private citizen, the advisor's liability hinges on negligence, a lower standard, requiring proof that the advisor failed to exercise reasonable care in verifying the truth of the statement. Therefore, the correct approach is to meticulously evaluate the individual's public status and apply the corresponding legal standard for proving defamation. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume all individuals are private citizens and therefore only need to prove negligence. This fails to acknowledge that individuals who have achieved pervasive fame or notoriety, or who have voluntarily injected themselves or been drawn into a particular public controversy in Alabama, may be classified as public figures. Applying the negligence standard to a public figure would improperly lower the bar for defamation claims and disregard established Alabama case law protecting robust public discourse. Another incorrect approach is to apply the actual malice standard to all individuals, regardless of their public or private status. While this might seem like a safer, more protective approach for the advisor, it is legally incorrect and overly burdensome. It misinterprets the law by imposing a higher standard than required for private individuals, potentially hindering legitimate communication and unfairly shielding individuals from accountability for negligent falsehoods. A further incorrect approach is to focus solely on the falsity of the statement without considering the individual's status or the advisor's state of mind. While falsity is a necessary element of defamation, the legal standard for proving that falsity and the advisor's culpability, negligence, or actual malice, is directly dictated by whether the subject is a public figure or a private individual in Alabama. Ignoring this crucial distinction renders the analysis incomplete and legally flawed. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama must adopt a framework that prioritizes accurate legal classification. This involves 1. Identifying the subject of the statement and their potential status, public figure vs. private individual, based on Alabama's legal definitions. 2. Determining the applicable legal standard for defamation based on that status, actual malice for public figures, negligence for private individuals. 3. Gathering evidence to meet the specific burden of proof required by the applicable standard. This systematic approach ensures compliance with Alabama Defamation Law and minimizes legal risk. Question 18. Strategic planning requires a thorough understanding of the elements of defamation under Alabama law. Consider a scenario where a local blogger in Birmingham, Alabama, publishes an online article containing several critical remarks about a new restaurant, including allegations of unsanitary kitchen practices and poor food quality. The restaurant owner is considering a defamation lawsuit. Which of the following analytical approaches best aligns with the requirements for establishing a defamation claim in Alabama? Option A. Focus primarily on the blogger's intent to criticize the restaurant and whether the statements were perceived as negative or offensive by the public, regardless of their factual accuracy or the actual harm caused. Option B. Systematically evaluate whether the blogger's statements were published, were of and concerning the restaurant, were false statements of fact, were defamatory on their face or by innuendo, and if the restaurant suffered demonstrable damages to its reputation or business as a result. Option C. Prioritize the subjective feelings of the restaurant owner regarding the impact of the statements, without independently verifying the truth of the allegations or assessing the objective harm to the business's reputation. Option D. Assume that any negative statement made about a business, especially one concerning food safety or quality, is automatically defamatory and actionable under Alabama law, without the need to prove falsity or specific damages. Correct answer is B. Systematically evaluate whether the blogger's statements were published, were of and concerning the restaurant, were false statements of fact, were defamatory on their face or by innuendo, and if the restaurant suffered demonstrable damages to its reputation or business as a result. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama defamation law, specifically the elements a plaintiff must prove. The difficulty lies in distinguishing between statements that are mere opinion or hyperbole, which are generally protected, and statements of fact that are false and damaging, which can form the basis of a defamation claim. Careful judgment is required to assess the context, intent, and potential impact of the statements. The best approach involves a thorough analysis of each element of defamation under Alabama law. This means meticulously examining whether the statement was published, if it was of and concerning the plaintiff, if it was false, if it was defamatory on its face or by innuendo, and if the plaintiff suffered damages as a result. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal requirements for a successful defamation claim in Alabama, as established by Alabama Code Section 6-5-170 et seq. and relevant case law. By systematically evaluating each element, one can accurately determine the viability of a defamation claim, ensuring that legal advice is grounded in established legal principles and avoids speculative conclusions. This methodical process aligns with the ethical duty to provide competent legal counsel. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the speaker's intent or the perceived offensiveness of the statement without verifying its factual accuracy or assessing the actual damages. While intent can be relevant to malice in certain contexts, e.g., public figures, it does not substitute for the core elements of falsity and harm. Similarly, a statement being perceived as offensive does not automatically make it defamatory under Alabama law. It must be a false statement of fact that injures reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that any negative statement made about a business constitutes defamation without proving the statement was false and caused demonstrable harm to the business's reputation or financial standing. This overlooks the critical element of falsity and the requirement of actual damages, which are essential components of a defamation claim in Alabama. Relying on generalizations or assumptions rather than a rigorous application of the legal elements is a failure to provide competent and accurate legal analysis. Professional reasoning in such situations requires a commitment to factual investigation and legal precision. Professionals should first identify the specific statements made, the context in which they were made, and the intended audience. They must then research and apply the relevant Alabama defamation statutes and case law to each element of the claim. This involves distinguishing between statements of fact and opinion, verifying the truth or falsity of factual assertions, and assessing the nature and extent of any alleged reputational or financial harm. When in doubt, seeking clarification or additional information is crucial before rendering a definitive opinion. Question 19. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to clarify the application of Alabama defamation law in situations involving multiple communication channels. A client has made several allegedly defamatory statements about a former business partner. One statement was made in a private email sent only to the business partner and the client's attorney. Another statement was posted on the client's public social media profile, visible to anyone with internet access. A third statement was made during a private conversation with a mutual acquaintance. Which of the following analytical approaches best aligns with Alabama defamation law principles for assessing these distinct situations? Option A. Focus on the client's intent to cause harm as the primary determinant of defamation, without needing to prove specific elements like falsity or publication to a third party beyond the immediate parties involved in each communication. Option B. Treat all statements as equally actionable defamation under Alabama law, focusing primarily on the negative impact on the former business partner's reputation, as the intent was clearly to harm. Option C. Assume that any written statement, regardless of its audience or the possibility of truth, is automatically considered defamation per se under Alabama law, requiring no further proof of damages. Option D. Analyze each statement individually, considering the specific medium of publication, the intended audience, and the applicable elements of defamation under Alabama law, including the distinction between private and public communications and the relevant standards of fault. The correct answer is D. Analyze each statement individually, considering the specific medium of publication, the intended audience, and the applicable elements of defamation under Alabama law, including the distinction between private and public communications and the relevant standards of fault. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating the nuanced application of Alabama defamation law to distinct communication mediums, each with its own evidentiary and legal considerations. A professional must exercise careful judgment to ensure that claims are appropriately framed and supported, avoiding oversimplification or misapplication of legal principles. The best approach involves a precise and context-specific analysis of each alleged defamatory statement. This means recognizing that statements made in a private email to a limited audience may be treated differently under Alabama law than statements published on a public social media platform. The former might require proof of publication to a third party beyond the sender and recipient, while the latter inherently involves widespread publication. Furthermore, the analysis must consider the specific elements of defamation under Alabama law for each context, including falsity, publication, fault, and damages, and whether the statements constitute defamation per se or per quad. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the evidentiary burdens and legal standards applicable to each communication channel as interpreted under Alabama's defamation statutes and case law, ensuring that the legal framework is applied accurately and effectively. An incorrect approach would be to treat all alleged defamatory statements identically, regardless of the medium of publication. This fails to acknowledge that Alabama law, like most jurisdictions, differentiates between private and public communications, impacting the ease of proving publication and potentially the required level of fault. Applying a single standard across all contexts ignores the specific legal hurdles and evidentiary requirements unique to each. Another incorrect approach is to assume that any negative statement made in writing, regardless of its audience or the intent behind it, automatically constitutes actionable defamation under Alabama law. It overlooks crucial defenses and elements of defamation, such as truth, opinion, or privilege, and the requirement to prove specific damages in certain cases. It also fails to consider the varying standards of fault, actual malice vs. negligence, that may apply depending on whether the subject of the statement is a public figure or a private individual. Finally, an incorrect approach is to focus solely on the perceived harm to the individual without adequately considering the legal requirements for proving defamation under Alabama law. While emotional distress or reputational damage are important considerations, they are not sufficient on their own to establish a defamation claim. The claimant must still prove the essential elements of defamation as defined by Alabama statutes and judicial precedent. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic breakdown of each alleged defamatory statement. First, identify the medium of communication and the intended audience. Second, determine whether the statement constitutes fact or opinion. Third, assess whether the statement is demonstrably false. Fourth, consider the applicable standard of fault under Alabama law: negligence for private figures, actual malice for public figures. Fifth, evaluate the potential damages, distinguishing between defamation per se and per quod. Finally, research relevant Alabama case law and statutes to ensure the claim aligns with established legal principles for each specific context.